Part 7. What about the board of directors?
All of which is to ignore the people who currently control the capitalist corporation, define its goals, set its strategy, and determine, in general terms, how it works. The C-level executives, CEO, CFO, COO, and so on. Situated at the pinnacle of the corporate pyramid. Historically speaking, this group can be described as successors to the archetype of industrial capitalism as a whole, the Victorian entrepreneur. And like the Victorian entrepreneur, they continue to direct the enormous structure at whose apex they sit, in whatever direction they believe to be, in the best interests of the owners. It is perfectly true that the classic Victorian entrepreneur often personally embodied the capital, vision, strategy, organization, technical expertise, architecture, product concepts, and detailed design, not to mention detailed technical skills such as machine building and general innovation on which their company's success depended. Often they were the only individuals who knew how to get things done or had the resources to get things moving. Certainly the workers didn't, lacking as they did both the know-how and the resources, i.e., the money. However, the simple fact is, almost everything the classical Victorian proprietor needed to do for themselves, and which the modern corporate organization presents as being the work of its directors, is now done by paid employees. True, directors set overall targets, make strategic decisions and authorize and monitor investments and expenditure and so on, but as far as corporations of any size are concerned, actually exercising this executive authority is typically based on information and analysis provided by specialized employees and communication and decision-making lower down the hierarchy. And true, their responsibilities require considerable skill. However, there is no compelling reason why the same skills should not be acquired and exercised by an employee. In fact, the only reason these responsibilities fall to the company directors is because they are appointed by the shareholders, that is, the company's owners. The decisions made by company directors could just as easily be designed to achieve goals agreed democratically by the company's employees. There is no magic or virtue in the fact that the directors serve shareholders rather than employees, users and customers, or the population at large. Nor have these new specialists, administrators, analysts, accountants, architects, investment teams, business strategists and so on whose skill and effort the corporation now relies, been deployed as simply a cheaper alternative to the directors performing these tasks for themselves. These are not roles modern executives could perform for themselves, but are too trivial for them to waste their time on. The incomprehensibly complex and sophisticated nature of the modern industrial organization is completely beyond the grasp of any single individual, such as the classic entrepreneur, or even an entire board of directors. For example, the technical refinement and organizational complexity of many of the tasks required to generate a basic status report is beyond the grasp of many of those who occupy seats on the board, yet who rely entirely upon the quality, timeliness, and reliability of the information such reports contain. The idea that other far more complicated tasks could be performed by the board is surreal. In other words, it is not as though this extraordinary transformation of the Victorian entrepreneur's personally run company into a corporate organization that can only operate as a comprehensively social system was the legacy of the company's directors or their entrepreneurial predecessors. On the contrary, just as investment in the modern corporation is derived from previous cycles of surplus value extraction rather than from primitive accumulation or the injection of independent sources of wealth, so everything about the corporation, as it now stands, was created by previous generations of employees. All the board of any substantial company now does personally is to manage the rights and interests of the owners and ensure the extraction of surplus value and its distribution to the company's investors, its creditors, and to themselves. Thus, the role of the chief executive officer, the CEO, is to set corporate goals and ensure that the corporate strategy will meet them. The key instrument of this strategy, the money, is likewise the responsibility of the chief finance officer. If there are any clear-cut villains in the exploitation of middle and working class alike, it is these two, whose functions are as close as possible to the corporation's business interests. But of course, strategy and investment as such would still be needed by an organization even if it were entirely under its workers' control. So, the socialist solution to all this is unlikely to be as simple as abolishing the board of directors outright, though the shareholders definitely have to go. Just as many of the functions of the state will likely endure after the political instrument of the bourgeoisie has withered away, so the high-level technical functions directors now perform may well survive the advent of socialism. Indeed, relieved of the narrowing and distortion they undergo in conditions of capitalist economics, which is to say, when performing their specifically business functions, such roles may emerge from the ugly chrysalis of the capitalist corporation and take on a genuinely social form. So some functions currently performed by C-level executives may be needed in a socialist organization, and at least some of the corresponding systems and processes may be salvageable. However, there would also be fundamental differences. To pluck out only the most obvious, these executive offices would be democratically elected and supervised by all members of the organization. The only reason this is not presently possible is that the purpose of the board simply isn't to further the technical purposes of the organization, that is, to make useful goods and services. On the contrary, the work of members of the organization with technical knowledge is of only secondary significance because the technical side of the organization is only a means to its business ends, which is to say, to profit. This is also why executives are not responsible for the interests of the people who do the actual work or the organization's customers and users. Rather, they are answerable solely to the organization's owners. Eliminate the latter, and with it, the profit motive, and a democratic alternative immediately becomes both visible and viable. As the agile revolution of the last decade or two has demonstrated, it is possible to carry out large-scale operations without needing a bureaucratic hierarchy of specialists, which is a key means by which capitalism organizes the domination of the many by the few. On the contrary, a radically democratic structure seems to emerge naturally in agile organizations. A massively flattened and democratized organization would have to learn new ways of working, but that should be no more of a problem than the creation of the original corporation, which also constituted a comprehensive revolution in how work was managed and performed. This is not, however, a state of affairs that can be realistically applied to individual organizations. The historical evidence from cases like the Lucas Plan and thousands of cooperatives worldwide makes it clear that control by workers in place of boards of directors is viable even in a capitalist environment. Spain's Mondragon cooperative currently has more than 81,000 members organized into 96 self-governing cooperatives and 14 research and development centers, and makes up one of the country's largest business groups. On the other hand, a capitalist environment is not only competitive, not necessarily a problem for a cooperative, but also directly hostile to socialized organizations of all kinds. As a result, while capitalism continues to dominate the economic environment, accommodations, sometimes quite brutal, are unavoidable. As Noam Chomsky said of Mondragon,
"It's worker-owned, it's not worker-managed, although the management does come from the workforce often, but it's in a market system and they still exploit workers in South America, and they do things that are harmful to the society as a whole, and they have no choice. If you're in a system where you must make profit in order to survive, you are compelled to ignore negative externalities, effects on others."
So, cooperatives founded under capitalist conditions, though they may foreshadow a future socialist world in certain limited ways, cannot be any more than stepping stones to a socialist economy and society. Still, they make it clear that capitalism itself is not inescapable.